Good morning, good afternoon, good evening around the world, wherever you're zooming in from. We really appreciate you joining us today for a really lively, amazing group of folks that are going to talk about Southeast Asia. You're going to find out more about Southeast Asia in the next 60 minutes than you ever dreamed of, because these folks know what's going on. They're up to date, including what's going on with COVID-19 and its impact on countries across the region. It's a Globinar that is focusing in on megatrends and what the opportunities are in the region. And I'm very pleased to first introduce Kirsty Wilkinson. She's our director in Global Chamber Melbourne. And Kirsty, thank you so much for arranging this. It must have been a handful considering the talented folks that you had to corral to get together for this event.
Thank you very much, Doug, for the introduction. I'm really pleased to get this group together to talk about the trends and opportunities in Southeast Asia. This is our first Global Chamber Melbourne event, and hoping many more great events coming up too. We're looking for members and also those who would be interested in joining the Global Advisory Board as well. So if you're interested, feel free to get in touch, and I'd be happy to have a chat with you. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Campbell MacKintosh, who I've known for a while now, and we've worked closely on a couple of things. Campbell has also been helping me organise this webinar, so thank you, Campbell, for that. Campbell specialises in especially Indonesia, having worked for BHP for a number of years over there, and also in other countries such as Malaysia, also Thailand, and also an interest in Vietnam. So I'll pass it over to Campbell.
Right, thanks Kirsty, and yeah, thanks Doug as well, and yeah, look forward to a really interactive webinar. I'm going to focus on Indonesia, and I suppose I rate Indonesia as the sleeping giant of Southeast Asia, and it's particularly relevant for us here in Australia because it is our the nearest Asian country and partner. Indonesia's got the fourth biggest population in the world at 270 million people, so it is a substantial country, but of course it's made up of, it's the largest archipelago of islands in the world too, so it's quite a difficult place to navigate your way around and get around to. I think, like most Asian countries, what's attractive about Indonesia is there's a really emerging middle class now happening, and certainly the poverty is now starting to be reduced, which is really on the back of a very progressive government in Indonesian terms over the last 5 to 10 years, where they really are now focusing programs. They're investing in health, they're investing in education, and also they're investing, excuse me, in infrastructure, like a lot of Asian countries. In terms of COVID's been obviously hit there pretty hard, like most Asian countries, but the restrictions are now starting to be let off, and manufacturing activity starting to increase. Shopping malls are being opened up again. So there is a little bit of life now in the economy, and it's starting to come back. And starting to come back to life. I suppose just a few trends I just wanted to touch on very quickly before I talk about the opportunities. But the central bank has been cutting interest rates. It's down to about 4% now to try and boost some activity. Despite that, the retail sales are down significantly. But as I said before, with the opening up of shopping malls and things, that will start to increase. In 2021, the government is forecasting that exports will increase by 7% and imports will increase by 10%. So that's some pretty promising signs for the economy. Probably the most exciting news that's really come out this month was on the 5th of July. The Indonesian-Australian Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, bit of a mouthful there, was signed, and that's been negotiated, as I understand it, for the last 10 years. And that's, as the name suggests, is an economic partnership agreement between Indonesia and Australia. And this is a really momentous thing that's occurred. So the main aspects of that I just want to touch on very briefly, and I'm happy to provide more details offline in terms of the Globinar. But there's two major areas that covers, and that is one is in terms of allowing for majority ownership of Australian businesses that are that are setting up businesses in Indonesia. And that can range from anywhere from about, the norm is about 67%, through to, in some cases with tourism, 100%. For those that know a bit about Indonesia and the history of the country, that is a massive, massive step forward, because it's been very, very difficult to invest in businesses in Indonesia in the past. So that's specific for Australia. The other thing that's really exciting too, and I suppose really what we're all about is what the opportunities are, is that the agreement does move with a progressive plan to actually eliminate tariffs and allow Australian businesses to actually export to Indonesia. And then also from the flip side, for Indonesian businesses to import or export to Australia. And some of the tariffs are starting to come off in a number of different areas. And one of them, in products like grain feed, dairy, steel, vegetables, beef, etc., etc. So that's again a very, very promising sign. The final thing I'll just touch on is that I just wanted to touch on what the top exports are coming out of Indonesia, or probably what the products, if you were looking at importing, that are probably the best things to look at. So things like plywood, rubber, palm oil, textiles, footwear, they're probably the most common exports that Indonesia sends out from the country. It's a very resource-rich country. It's got a good and reasonably cheap labour force. So anything that's manufactured, anything that's a raw material, is an attractive proposition to said. I just want to make that point that please don't forget Indonesia. It is a really interesting place. It's very diverse, and it's right at our back doorstep. So happy to talk to anyone offline about the opportunities there. So I'll hand it back. Thank you.
Thank you, Campbell. I think Kirsty is next.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. Firstly, I just thought I'd talk briefly about the COVID situation in Australia. We've actually got quite large numbers for Australia anyway. It jumped to 502 yesterday, 484 of which were coming from Victoria. And we're actually currently in lockdown in Melbourne and parts of and another part of regional Victoria. Also, we've got unemployment of about 7.4%, which is about 1 million people, which is actually quite high for Australia. But I think there's, people are starting to really think about revamping their businesses and pivoting them. But I think it is a difficult time, I guess. But I would like to talk about Japan and opportunities there. Now, in Japan, they're starting to open up. They are finding increased cases in Tokyo, but they're going to be some mandatory mask wearing in Japan as well. Japan is typically, even in the winter or when someone's got a cold, they'll actually generally wear a mask anyway, which is actually this year to actually reduce the numbers of the flu. There's some interesting things happening in Japan at the moment. A lot of people who've lived in Japan a long time have actually not able to leave Japan and then re-enter, because there's actually a ban on many countries, including Australia at present. This is actually having a huge impact on companies in Europe, for example, that have had dealings with Japan. They are starting to talk to countries about lifting some of those bans, and Australia is actually one of those, so that's quite promising. Also, there's a lot of opportunity in Japan for a number of reasons. One is a lot of the medium to larger companies have actually got large reserves of money saved, and so they actually do have the money to spend. There's I think a lot of companies and businesses don't think about Japan as they think it is being too difficult, but if you have the right advice and if you and actually plan well ahead, you can actually have, there's plenty of really good opportunities. So if anyone is interested in finding out more about Japan, please feel free to get in touch. So thank you. Thank you, Doug.
I think we're going to go to Russell.
Sorry, Russell's next.
Thank you.
I'd like to introduce Russell. I was introduced to Russell by a friend who runs a lawyer legal referral service. Russell's is an international trade and customs lawyer, and I'd love to hear more about what Russell's got to say today.
Thanks, Kirsty. As Kirsty mentioned, a lot of my work is in international trade and customs, and I thought it might be useful just to chat a bit about what we're seeing our clients deal with in that context. And my work sort of falls into two areas. It's either helping with commercial agreements to facilitate trade or dealing with the border authorities. Now, I'll talk personally about those commercial agreements. And you know, we all know a contract is not something that we want to spend a lot of time poring over. And the reality is you draft a contract, and if everything goes right, you normally don't need to look at it again. What we're seeing at the moment, though, is because there's so much more uncertainty about the idea of will these goods actually be purchased? Will they be able to ship them where we need to ship them? Will the demand be there? Can we pay for them? More attention is being placed on the contract. It has a lot more work to do because we're concerned that the likelihood of a dispute down the track is much higher. And the areas that you'd expect people to look at are not surprising. It's going to be things like the force majeure clause, the governing law, and the dispute resolution clause. I think that what I would like to raise with the group is, of course, it's important to have a force majeure clause for those unexpected occurrences, but we've moved past COVID-19 being an unexpected occurrence, and we have a new normal. We can probably have a little bit of predictability in the very short term, but we're in a spot now where we know there's a risk, and what we're seeing clients do more up front, and what I think is a good idea, is actually talk about those risks and allocating that risk at the outset. And that might mean that if you're a supplier and you don't want to accept any risk that there will no longer be a demand for the goods by the time you're ready to put them in the container and on the boat, you might have to accept a lower price for your goods if your customer is saying, we're going to pay that no matter what, and we're not going to use COVID-19 as a reason to get out of this contract if things go wrong. So we're seeing a bit more dynamics around that sort of negotiation, and it's not just a case of let's just make sure we've got a force majeure clause in there, because really that doesn't deal with allocating risk. It sort of just gives a mechanism, I guess, for the contract to deal with it, but it doesn't necessarily provide a commercial solution. In terms of governing law, everyone on the call will probably be familiar that some countries have an automatic force majeure regime and other countries require it to be in the contract. And there's a mix of those countries throughout Southeast Asia. So make sure you correctly choose which law you want to apply. If it's Australian law, you won't have an automatic force majeure regime, and the contracts will be, you'll need to specifically deal with how you're going to handle COVID-19 in the terms of your contract. Don't expect the common law to come in and pick up the pieces. And dispute resolution also becomes extra important. International trade, I'm always pushing for arbitration as the dispute resolution, because they're, you know, if Australia, you know, our largest trading partner is China, but our decisions of our courts aren't enforceable in China. So we need arbitration, but I think it works well with most countries. And where it will bring you benefits at the moment is, while you're not going in looking for a dispute, if one arises, it's not going to be very easy for you to jump on the plane and go attend a court hearing in Japan. You're going to need the flexibility that comes with arbitration, that greater flexibility to do hearings by video link and the like. They're more suited for that. So we're definitely seeing the contract doing a lot more work and a lot more upfront attention being placed on those issues. Some of the other issues I want to perhaps talk about more from the customs side of work I do is we're seeing both opportunities and an increase in protectionism. And that's not just our exporting partners. Australia is we're doing, the most protectionist thing Australia does is anti-dumping investigations, and they're high tariffs targeted at specific goods, often in the steel and aluminium industries, but that's expanding. We've had a great surge in those investigations over the past 3 or 4 months, and I'm seeing a lot of activity in that area. So the government's definitely not holding back on those protectionist type measures. But in terms of trading partners, we are seeing more sort of scrutiny on quarantine type measures, even if it's not, sometimes COVID is the reason given, even though there's not necessarily a link between food safety and the like and COVID-19. There's also people trying to make money out of the personal protective equipment, but you need to be aware Australia has export restrictions on those goods, and many countries have a sort of therapeutic or health and goods overlay which may apply to those goods. Sometimes there's a real distinction between a good that's designed to be used in a hospital, and that will be regulated and may need to be licensed, and goods that are designed just for use in the home. So but be very careful about those sort of markets where people are seeing real opportunities. Just be aware that there's quite often a regulatory overlay there. Look, I've run over on my time. I'll just lastly mention there is a fair bit of activity going on in the free trade agreement space at the moment. We are negotiating with the UK and Europe, and we're also reviewing the Japan and China FTA. So if anyone's had problems using those FTAs, time to get in touch with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in Australia and let them know what those problems are so they can advocate for you and try to get solutions. Look, thanks for that. I'm going to pass back to Doug.
Thank you, Russell. Appreciate the update in that area. I want to just take one step back, and I failed to mention, besides Director of Global Chamber Melbourne, in the case of Kirsty Wilkinson, she's also the founder and principal at Asia Market Makers. One of the things that makes her an expert on the Japan market is she's got many years of experience in the liquor and retail industries in Japan, and so we count on her, besides her position in Melbourne on the side, and very significantly, she's got some really great consulting and support structures in place to help companies to land in Japan. So I wanted to make that visible to everybody. Speaking of visible, you're going to see a lot of Colin here in the next few minutes. Colin Christie is the Executive Director of Global Chamber Manila. Colin is an expert on just about everything, technology and healthcare. And it turns out now he's in the Philippines, and he's an expert on the Philippines, and he's up to date on what's going on and the impact of COVID-19. He's a BPO expert as well. And so I'm guessing he's going to be mentioning a little bit about that industry. Colin, thank you for sharing your expertise today.
Oh, thank you very much, Doug. I don't know about that, but having been in the Philippines business for 20 years, you pick up a few things, I guess, along the way. And also thanks, Kirsty, and also the fellow panelists. It's an honor to be with you all today. I thought I would just actually share a few visuals. So hopefully you're seeing that, if you could just confirm.
Looks good.
Great. I'm just going to jump in, with the obligatory update on COVID. So I think the visual tells a picture of a little bit of encouragement. Actually, here you can see our 7-day moving average has been on a relatively steep decline just over the last couple of weeks or so, during the month of July. The total case number, of course, is pretty big, 72,000. Philippines is a country of about 106 million, just to kind of calibrate that. And also, fortunately, the fatality rate has also significantly been coming down. You can see we've kind of had two waves there. So as a result, much as you've heard from the other panelists, you're starting to see some loosening here in Metro Manila. They've loosened, they've opened the malls, they've allowed people to return to work. Some of the commuting is back, but not the high density commuting. So generally, generally things are opening up. The Department of Health has done an excellent job actually of putting a lot of controls in place. So for example, before you go into any building, any mall, into any office place, you're required to actually, most of it's digital now, you're required on apps to report your temperature and your health conditions. And of course, this gives them a record too, so for contact tracing, they know where pretty much everyone is going and has been. So yeah, so that's just a quick update on COVID. I thought I'd just give a quick snapshot of the Philippines itself for those who may be less familiar. I know a lot of you probably visited here already, but the Philippines, some of the reasons why it's done so well in the BPO sector that Doug mentioned is it's primarily English as its language. In fact, English is an official language as well as Filipino. And another reason is that besides having a good sized population of 100 million, the median age is only, as you can see there, 24.1, only 24 years old. So very young population, a lot of folks moving into the workforce with great English skills, and obviously, raised now in the digital generation, right? So you can see we've had a pretty good run in the Philippines, other than 2020, the nosedive in GDP has happened around the world. Very steady 6 to 7% GDP running. In fact, even prior to 2014, if you go quite far back, we've had that 5, 6, 7% GDP for almost a couple of decades now. So you can imagine when you have that type of growth, which I know is also true around Southeast Asia, and a young population, you end up with a very fast growth in consumers, right? People with a little bit of disposable income. And so we've very much been driven by the service economy because of that, because of this growth in disposable income leading to a lot of consumer purchases. And then you can see by sector, of course, services representing more than half of the GDP of the country, and industry about a third. So that's because Philippines has become a world leader in business process outsourcing. In terms of trade, I thought it was kind of interesting to see the difference between merchandise trade and services trade for the Philippines. So you can see that the service trade, which is primarily export, through both the electronics industry and the BPO industry, that generates huge inflows of foreign reserves, right? Especially U.S. dollars, large flow of U.S. dollars coming in, as well as from overseas Filipino workers sending money home. And that then, of course, drives that demand. And so not surprisingly, on the merchandise side, we're dominantly importers. So we export services and labor, and then we have rising incomes from that, and then that drives demand for merchandise. So this is good news for any of you out there who are trying to sell products, hard products, merchandise products, to both the Filipino consumers and Philippine businesses. There is a very high demand for products coming in. You can see our trading partners are China and the US, and there again, it tells the same story. We export to the US because we do a lot of BPO work. We also do quite a bit of BPO work with Japan. But of course, most of the imports are coming from China these days. China's become a major partner for the Philippines in Philippines trade. And in terms of commodities, the types of products, so this might be of interest to those of you, again, who have things to bring into the Philippines. There is something called the Build, Build, Build program. It's the initiative of our current president. And it's to really, even though the Philippines GDP has been so strong and the growth has been so great, infrastructure has really lagged, airports, roads, bridges. And so they're spending around $25 billion even this year, this calendar year. They've identified 100 key infrastructure projects, bridges, roads, smart cities, railways, upgrade to airports and seaports. So this is long overdue and generating tremendous business opportunity. And then just a couple slides to wrap up. I thought, what do you need to know about doing business in the Philippines? And I have two answers, and it sort of depends if you're going after the SME space or the enterprise space. So in terms of SMEs, we do have a startup ecosystem here. We've yet to produce a single unicorn in the Philippines, so that's something they're trying to do. You can see it's heavily dominated by fintech. Probably not surprising there too, because it's a young digital population that have the disposable income now. And this is where COVID has had a significant impact In fact, I was reading yesterday, they're estimating that we've moved 3 years forward in the adoption rate of digital products, digital transformation, fintech in the last 3 months because of COVID, right? People stuck at home, they're ordering food online, they're ordering goods online, and all of a sudden now they need to pay for it online. So fintech was really lagging, but it's had a huge boost, shot in the arm. So if you're into e-commerce or fintech, and in the SME space, tremendous opportunity here. If you're in the enterprise space, it's all about conglomerates. We have 10, 12 major conglomerates that pretty much dominate everything on the large business side. So with, depending what industry you're in, undoubtedly, if you want to export to that industry, you're going to have to form a relationship with one of these conglomerate companies. The good news is we can make introductions. We have great relationships, both with the conglomerates and also with the startup community. So with that, I'll wrap by saying, let's connect, open invitation to all of you to reach out to me about my contact details there. Or you can get them through the website, and look forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Really great information. Thank you, Colin. All of our speakers other than Colin so far have been in Australia. We went north to speak with Colin in the Philippines, and now we're going to head pretty far east to Los Angeles. I believe you're there, Sam. Sam Nangia, he's the founder and managing member at India Global Advisors. He used to travel to India a lot. I'm guessing you're not doing that right now. So we look forward. Yes, we look forward to hearing more about your expertise about what's going on in India and what opportunities we should be thinking about.
Sure. So thank you for the introduction and welcoming Doug. And first of all, I want to say congratulations to all you guys in Australia for the launch of the Chamber. It's a wonderful event for the Global Chamber, for Kirsty, for Doug, for Campbell, for Russell, all you guys. Not Colin. Colin's like me. We're away from the actual where the fun is. But for everybody else, congrats on that. Really quick background. I'm a lawyer, just like just like Russ, and by background, law and consulting, business consulting. And so my lens is both with the consulting lens and with the law lens. And in terms of India, let me talk about some mega trends first, and then some of the trends where I think where a lot of us would probably be seeing pre-COVID and post-COVID. In terms of the mega trends, we're just like India is just like other countries around the world. We're seeing a lot of e-commerce, everything, I guess I would say. The shift to digital has been massive in terms of the last couple months, in terms of what's been happening. Like was just mentioned a few minutes ago, we're seeing an adaptation of digital really kicking quickly in the last couple of months. The next thing we're seeing is next-gen infrastructure. In India, India's shifted, I guess I would say, from a BPO destination to an innovation hub. And that's because of the infrastructure around the startup scene and the startup venture capital scene in India. The next thing that we're seeing is a lot of healthcare infrastructure, a lot of physical infrastructure being focused on by the governments. So that's kind of the mega trends, I guess I would say. Now, in terms of why India, very similar to Indonesia, what Campbell was talking about, we're seeing an emerging, developing mega country, meaning I would look at India 15 years before where China was. If you're looking at the next mega country in Asia or around the world, I think it's going to be India. I think you're going to see a lot of companies continuously to put money into the India emerging market. I think there's going to be increased FDI going in from developed countries, including Australia, Europe, and the United States, of course. I think they're going to be in a few different areas. You're going to see India exploding in education, in ag business, in health, in tourism, in financial services, in sports. I can go on, but that's where we think there's going to be opportunities for strategic opportunities for investment, either on the capital side or on the operational side, operational expertise. I think there's going to be a lot of companies from these markets that want to sell to the emerging consumer base. If you look at India in terms of their trajectory for the PPP, purchasing price parity, it's increasing. GDP is constantly growing as one of the mega countries in Asia and around the world. So we're seeing that. I can tell you what, I want to give you a quick lens in terms of what's happening pre-COVID and where we've shifted post-COVID. Pre-COVID, we were working a lot with retailers, a lot with franchise systems that were wanting to get into the marketplace, wanting to sell to the Indian consumer. But so we were working with maybe about 8 or 9 food and beverage brands, brands in education, in financial services. And when COVID hit, obviously a lot of that business development, a lot of that development kind of slowed down. So what we did, we actually shifted in the last 2.5 months, 3 months. So we've shifted to where many of our clients are now shifting in terms of supply chain diversification. We're seeing a lot of companies from the US, companies all over the world that had or that have concentrated supply chain risk in China, looking to diversify out. So a lot of these companies are looking to diversify their supply chains, and that diversification may be from the supplier side, it might be from the manufacturing side, it might be through a small part of that supply chain, or it might be major parts of the supply chain. Last year when the US and when US and China had started their trade tensions, a lot of this started happening. The conversations were starting last year, and a lot of these companies were actually going into Indonesia, going into the Philippines, going into Malaysia. India was not able to capture a lot of these kind of companies moving out from China. However, there are some major reforms on the table being discussed right now, including labor reforms. If those reforms happen, which we think will happen, and based on our conversation with our teams out in New Delhi, where the governments are, we think it's going to happen. If that happens, we anticipate much more money going into and much more supply chain diversification going into India, just because of the reasons why I kind of mentioned. 1.3 billion people, the youngest population in the world in terms of the next 4 to 5 years. So we're going to see a lot of that coming out of India. The other thing that we're going to be seeing is, I think it was mentioned also with regards to, Colin mentioned it with regards to the Philippines, we're going to see a lot of these companies also looking into infrastructure opportunities in India. Infrastructure and what the government is doing in terms of investing in infrastructure, including airports. We have 100 airports we have 100 airports coming in to the system in 5 years. We got roads, we have dams, we have highways, the same type of infrastructure that you see in China. That's what India needs to invest in order to become a dominant player in the world with regards to what it's trying to do. So that's where that's where we see the next wave of investment in FDI. And then the last thing I want to say in terms of how to get into India and what is the kind of the roadmap of getting into the Indian marketplace. First of all, I think you have to be patient. I'm not going to say India is the easiest place to do business. And if I was, I would be facetious and I would be selling myself. It's not. It's a tough place to do business. But Prime Minister Modi over the last 5 years has made it his goal to increase, to legitimize how to do business in India and to make it easy. So when he came into office 5 years ago, we were ranked, I think, at number 150 or 163 in terms of the ease of world rank rankings for ease of business. Now, 5 years later, we've jumped into the 63rd spot, which is one of the biggest movers in the last 5 years. So he's continuously initiating, agendas that would make things easier for folks. Having said that, you still have to have cultural awareness. You have to be committed to the marketplace, meaning C-level folks that are listening to this conversation in Australia or US, wherever they are, have to understand your board has to be committed to that marketplace. If not, you're going to go in, you're going to get burned, and you're going to get out. You have to be committed to that marketplace. And it's going to be a midterm to a long-term game. But if you go in with the right strategy, with the right team, it's going to be a wonderful market for you guys and for anyone to kind of look into as you guys are, as companies are looking to expand their international footprint in Asia or otherwise. With that, back to you, Doug.
Great. Thank you, Sam. So we have several questions already. What we suggest is either send them to the Q&A area on the Zoom link, or you can send them to info@globalchamber.org. And so thank you for those of you who already sent me a couple. So you touched a little bit, Sam, on one of the issues that was also raised with Campbell in a question. So I'd like to open up the floor regarding China. So you touched on the supply chain restructuring and the changes, which might be somewhat of a pseudonym for China and what's going on there. Could you talk a little bit more about what's happening there, maybe on a more macro level? And then, you know, what are the countries that are benefiting? Certainly India is a little bit, maybe not as much as they want. There are other countries that are benefiting. Could you talk a little bit about what's actually happening there?
Do you want to take that on, Campbell, first, and then I can chime in?
Yep, go for it, Sam.
Oh, no, go for it. You can go first, and I'll chime in after that.
Oh, okay. Well, look, I suppose specifically one country that I'm aware, and I'm really talking from an Australian term here, that, and I believe it's happening with the US businesses as well, is Vietnam is a country which is emerging big time at the moment. Their government is very, very aggressive in promoting foreign investment and so forth. Their workforce is very reasonably priced. So there is, as I understand, a big trend with businesses moving to Vietnam, maybe even relocating some of their manufacturing bases or whatever from China to Vietnam. And I visited there early last year, and I couldn't believe the development that was going on there from when I'd been there about 5 years before. So that's probably one country that I think people are taking up the opportunity of saying, as Sam's been talking about and Colin about diversifying, I suppose the reliance on China. So that's one country, Doug, that I would certainly highlight.
Okay, and the reason for doing that then is it simply just the reliance on China for various products? What's the Australian view of why that's important?
Yeah, I'm sure the other panelists would agree with us. Yes, there is. Australia has become very, very reliant on China over the years, and it's taken a while to get to that stage. But certainly, the last 5 to 10 years, many businesses that are importing components or manufactured parts or even goods that they're selling, retail sales and whatever, have really focused on China. And one of the things that really frustrates me is when people talk about Asia, they always talk about China, and China is Asia. So, but I think with the recent events, obviously there's a bit of interesting goings on between the various countries, between the US and China, now Australia and China, and even, Sam, India and China. I think people now are waking up and saying we need to diversify our risk and look at other markets to potentially invest in or source from.
Okay.
Let me just chime in too, Doug, if I may.
Sure.
Sure. So in terms of the why, I think over the last 15 years, if you look at supply chain, if you look at logistics, one of the main drivers for the diversification of a supply chain was cost, right? If you look at any company here in the US or Australia or anyone that's diversifying a supply chain, one of the primary reasons is going to be cost. What is it? How am I going to save in this cost? The other element is going to be strategic. It's going to be, okay, if I want to sell and capture to parts of Asia, and I want to sell X, Y, and Z, if I want to sell these widgets in this part of Asia, what is the best efficient way to develop that supply chain? Is it, okay, well, you know what? I'm going to be able to go to a country like China because I'm going to save on cost. And strategically where China is located, I'm also going to have access to these marketplaces, meaning I can ship out from China to these marketplaces. Now it's almost like a double benefit. So what happened with COVID was that's where you saw the kinks in this system. So COVID actually brought out these kinks, including supply chain. For example, if you think about it, when COVID hit, where did it first hit? It hit in China. It hit in Wuhan. It hit in these mega parts of supply chain concentration in China. So what we saw in Australia and the US, you saw supply of X, Y, and Z getting constrained because of the COVID situation, because of factories being locked down. The next phase of that was you saw other parts of the country, of the world, getting hit by COVID, and now demand started decreasing. So what happened was, as we all were secondary in the wave of COVID, the next thing that people wanted and the countries wanted were PPPs, right? Protective equipment, like anything that could protect us against the COVID. So masks, all these essential items were also being delivered and manufactured in China. That was the other issue. That was the other thing that kind of rose up in terms of we do not have the ability to get essential products from China because they're not exporting these out. So we were looking, so the US, at the very least in the US, people were looking for this alternative supply. So they went to other parts of Southeast Asia, they went to India, they went to wherever they could find these kind of products. On the flip side, now the third part of this is the governments get involved. The government of the US, the government of Australia, they put pressure on the US companies, on Australian companies saying, hey, you guys need to reassess the supply chain. We as a country do not want to have this happen again. Then what happens is now you're going to get a lot of conversations from Congress. You get Congress involved. Now, at least from the US side, Congress is looking at ways how to tackle that cost issue. They're looking at deglobalization for certain things, meaning either through tax subsidies or other incentives for manufacturers to kind of come back to the US, to come back to Australia, to diversify that supply chain out. However, the secondary benefit of supply chain and diversification is still out there, which is, I want to sell to Asia. What is the best way to sell to Asia? It's to have a part of that supply chain still in that marketplace. So that's where we see Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, and hopefully soon, if these reforms happen, I personally think, and with all due respect, I think India is going to be a big player in that field. I think India is going to be able to capture a lot of that business, a lot of those opportunities coming out. I think we're going to be competitive in terms of India.
Okay, that sounds good. Kirsty, certainly Japan is both being hurt and being helped by the situation with China. One of the big hurts, I'm sure, is tourism, probably way down in Japan, and then just in general retail sales. But I'm betting that the Japanese are also upgrading plants that are in some of the countries that Sam talked about to make up for some of the gaps that we're seeing here. What's your perspective on when you think about Japan and how the influence of China is impacting market opportunities? Oh.
I'd just like to follow up on what Campbell was saying. I think for too long, Australian companies have relied too heavily on China. And by listening to all of the speakers today, I think you can realize that there's lots of opportunities elsewhere, not just in China. And I think what's been holding back a lot of people in entering Japan is they see it as being too hard. Where the areas that I see where people try to actually get in the Japanese market and just say they failed is that they don't do the due diligence that they actually should. Currently, I'm working on a proposal with a baby wear company in the US wanting to export to Japan. Now, we're looking at the overall strategy for entering into Japan, and there are some particular products that they did try to sell into Japan, but they've not had a very good success. That's because that they haven't done the due diligence and they haven't done very good follow-up with the Japanese distributor. So I think that's really important. I think as you mentioned, Doug, there's been Japan has had a huge hit in terms of Chinese visitors to Japan. At the moment, Japan has actually got a huge list of banned countries, so there's not a lot of people actually going to Japan at the moment. As I mentioned before in my talk. They are starting to have discussions with some countries, and I know that they're starting to have discussions with Australia, for example. I do know of a number of long-term residents in Japan who've been greatly affected by Japan's decision to not allow people to come back in if they decide to leave Japan for whatever reason. And I know of one lady whose father passed away in France, and actually she had to get special permission to leave Japan and re-enter, and that was denied. So, but I think they are starting to slowly open up. But I think Japan has been hit quite hard, and also in terms of retail as well. I know that when I was in Tokyo last time, I was in Ginza, and the number of Chinese visitors was astounding. There were buses and buses of Chinese visitors going to Ginza for shopping trips, etc. I think I'm not sure on the manufacturing side, Doug, but I can find out a bit more information. But I know that Japan's been hit quite hard. But I actually read something, I think it was yesterday, suggesting that about 85% of European companies have had dealings with Japan have been greatly affected because of the fact that they're currently on the ban list at the moment. So I'm hoping that as things improve with COVID, that they'll start letting more people in. I did read a couple of weeks ago where they were looking at having a number of countries. I think it was Australia, New Zealand, Thailand, and it might have been Vietnam, looking at just letting business people in, but capping the number as well. So I think they're also looking at that. So I think it's a wait and see type approach. But and also I did want to briefly mention, I didn't mention in my talk at the beginning, I'm working with 2 different US companies wanting to export to Japan, and we're having to change the way that we do things. Firstly, I can't travel to Japan at the moment. Australia's got a ban on any international travel currently. And fortunately, I've got a lot of really good contacts in Japan, and I'm actually working with them on these particular projects, and they're actually able to help me do a lot of the groundwork, so that means I actually don't have to go there. Also, a lot of things are being bought online. For example, I guess the market research interviews that were normally done face-to-face are actually being bought online. So it's changing things quite a bit. And a lot of people are still working from home. So, but yeah, it's just, I think I've just currently working with the 2 US companies. I haven't had Australian companies contact me about Japan, but certainly having to be thinking outside the box and how to work best with that.
Okay, very good. There's a couple questions that I'm not exactly sure the direction of the question, but I'm going to give it my best shot. So if I don't do it, don't ask it properly, the questioner, please post something in the chat room. The first one relates maybe a little bit to what you just talked about, Kirsty, but regarding products that are in places like Indonesia, Japan, and the Philippines and India that are not exported. So basically products that are raised or produced within the country that stay there. Are there some of those that represent good exporting opportunities for other countries? Are there, and maybe taking the question a little bit higher, what are the best products and services that you're seeing that are in some of the key countries like was asked about? So who would like to take that one first? What product opportunities specifically are you seeing out there right now?
Campbell, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first. Yeah, I suppose specifically talking about Indonesia, I think the major product opportunities, as I sort of mentioned before, are really the, I don't know whether I want to use the term raw materials, but as I mentioned, things like palm oil, plywood, rubber, things like that are probably the major product opportunities. And then obviously they are a raw material of some description that could be converted, whether that be within Indonesia or bringing them back to Australia or the States or whatever. So yeah, I think those opportunities are really the biggest ones, Doug, to be honest. Also okay, oil and gas.
What about technology? A member I was talking to the other day that was talking about that the cybersecurity area is exploding there in a good way.
Look, I'm not totally experienced with that, I'm sorry. I believe there is a bit of activity in Indonesia, although as has sort of been alluded to, I'd be a little bit wary of sort of investing in that or being involved in that. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. Undoubtedly, what you raised earlier on infrastructure and digital technologies, that's certainly changing very fast. And so there's probably some local suppliers, but there seems like it would seem that there would be a good opportunity for others to come in and take advantage of those as well.
Doug,
Colin,
maybe I could jump in on the technology question, because I've noticed something quite interesting happening in Southeast Asia, which is, at least in terms of the Philippines hasn't, but ironically enough, in its own backyard, hasn't had much trade. As I mentioned, our service trade is largely with the US and Europe. Our import trade is largely with China. But in the technology area, and especially in e-commerce, there seems to be a market that's developed broadly in Southeast Asia. So I would say Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, those kinds of countries where you're seeing technology platforms become dominant across those regions. So for example, one example would be Grab. Okay, so Grab started out as a ride-sharing app, right? It's a competitor to Uber. In fact, it beat Uber in the Philippines. Uber actually exited the Philippine market and bought a minority stake into Grab instead. But the Grab platform is now becoming rapidly an e-commerce platform, right? And especially during COVID, because they're in the logistics side, right? So for deliveries, e-commerce deliveries, and they've actually now created a marketplace. So the app, which started out as just ride hailing, now is like a online shopping marketplace. They also now have Grab Pay, right? So now it's just a payment platform. Well, Grab is not a Philippine company. It's done very well in multiple Southeast Asian countries, and that's allowing these tech companies to sort of better understand multiple Southeast Asia markets and maybe start to even open up collaboration opportunities between these markets. So I would say, yeah, in the tech area, especially around these fintech marketplace e-commerce apps is a really great example. And so people who are in that business, maybe in other parts of the world, who have ways to contribute to that ecosystem, there's a big opportunity there.
okay. Yeah, we spent the last month doing Globinars on artificial intelligence centered around Singapore. So there's certainly tremendous opportunities there as well. We're running out of time. We've only got about 8 minutes left, actually. So I'd like to just ask this next question, and then I'll probably ask each of you to give a roundup of any other ideas or thoughts that you have regarding companies thinking about the region. So this is the other question that I didn't quite capture because I don't know honestly anything about it, but it's Chad Wolver. So he's a really smart guy, works for a key bank. So I believe this must be true if he's asking it. He's asking if there is an import-export impact to or from Indonesia with the movement of capital from Jakarta to Myanmar. Is that opening up some opportunities? I don't know anything about that. Does anybody on the panel know anything about that and what its impact is?
Maybe Colin would be able to answer this one. I've got a fairly limited understanding of this particular thing. I can only relate to what my friends in Indonesia that I have are telling me. Yeah, look, the government have mooted that they're going to move the capital from Jakarta, I think, over to Borneo somewhere, Sumatra or probably Kalimantan, I think it was. The likelihood of that, I think the likelihood of that is fairly extreme. You've got to remember the island of Java has about 65% of the total population of Indonesia on it. It's a big place. It's 180, 190 million people. So I personally think, and in talking to my colleagues in Indonesia, that's a little bit of a pipe dream. So, but I could be wrong. I don't know what you think, Colin. I don't know what you're hearing in the Philippines.
Yeah, I agree, there. Campbell. It's really up in the air, right? So it's kind of, hard to know. And yeah, I think Chad's question was sort of around any opportunities. To be honest, I don't know enough about that specific area to give meaning advice, but something we could definitely do a little bit more research.
Okay,
yeah, and actually, I would think
I was just going to
Sorry,
say, I
Doug,
think I asked the question wrongly because he wrote Borneo, which was the right thing. And I was thinking, oh, Borneo,
Oh,
that's
okay.
Myanmar. So that's
Yeah.
not Myanmar, that's Burma, right?
No,
So
no,
the old
no,
name is
definitely
Burma.
not.
So I totally screwed everybody up. I apologize for my bad geography. So it does probably relate, as you said, Campbell, to the relocation of Jakarta as a capital. And so I think that's something we're going to need to research. So we really appreciate the question, Chad, but we'll get back to you on that for sure. So let's see. So there's a question from Tony to Campbell. What's the metals industry look like in Indonesia? What's its level of sophistication? Or so where are they, and what opportunities might be there?
Yeah, look, it's been a little time since I've been involved in that. That's what I was primarily doing up in Indonesia. I was in the steel game in those days. But yeah, look, they have increased their capacity. Sophistication is probably not as great as you would see in terms of a Western country, obviously. But certainly with the amount of demand that's going to be coming through with the infrastructure requirements and investment that are going to be happening, I know that they are investing. One of the, as I mentioned before, and an opportunity for Australia, and I'm assuming other countries, is to continue to invest into steel making, particularly in Indonesia. And I'd imagine that will continue. I know that the Blue Scope group, that the old BHP Steel group, they're still heavily investing in Indonesia in that term and doing joint ventures, etc. So yeah, look, I think there'll be some significant opportunity, and it'll be around infrastructure, building products, etc. So and that won't be just in Java. I think that will be through into the Kalimantan, the Sumatras, the other major islands in Indonesia. That's where a lot of demand will occur. And probably one thing I'll just throw in there is that the logistics of moving that sort of product, particularly that heavy product, around the archipelago of Indonesia is a major, major challenge. So investment tends to be in those sort of industries would be localized. So basically setting up in those islands rather than trying to manage the nightmare of trying to move those products up from, say, Java through the archipelago. So
that makes sense. So now we really only just have a few minutes, and so I'd like to ask each of you to just take 30 seconds and summarize. And let's start with you, Campbell. What would you like to wrap up on, and just make sure that people understand relative to the opportunities right now in Southeast Asia?
Yeah, look, I've been a bit of a recurring record on this, but I'm very passionate about the Asian space, particularly Southeast Asia, and I really encourage everyone to open their eyes, essentially, Doug. Look at the opportunities outside of just the China focus. There's many countries, as we're all talking about, that are really progressing. Their governments are really promoting investment and trade. So yeah, please open your eyes and investigate.
Campbell's the principal at Focalise Consulting, and if you can't find him or you don't have access to the directory, just send an email to info@globalchamber.org and we'll find a way to get you connected. Obviously, very experienced and knowledgeable person around the entire region. Let's go now to Russell Reese. He's the partner at Customs and Global Trade at Hunt & Hunt Lawyers. Russell, could you summarize anything that you'd like for people to think about in these days?
Thanks, Doug. I might just quickly touch on something which I didn't raise in my 5 minutes, but has been a theme. If you're looking at export opportunities, particularly from Australia, we've done a fantastic job at getting free trade agreements with our Southeast Asian trading partners. Vietnam's an excellent example. Korea's another example. Particularly on agricultural goods, you can have a benefit, a customs duty benefit of over 50% using those FTAs over other Western nations. You're probably going to be on par with the Southeast Asian nations, but if you're looking at competing against the US, some of the EU countries, you're going to have a great advantage. So I would say look at that as an opportunity, as an alternative to China.
Okay, thank you, Russell. Sam, we're rooting for you, and we're rooting for India. There sounds like there's going to be a lot of progress coming up. If
Yeah,
you just summarize.
Yeah, quick summary in terms of where we are with COVID. I think short-term opportunities are going to be more in the manufacturing and supply chain diversification. After COVID settles down a little bit, I think it's going to be retail, franchising, sports, real estate, health, tourism. I can go on and on. It's 1.3 billion people. People want to consume. People want to spend money. So that's where we are with India. And let's make some deals happen in India.
Absolutely. Let's do that. And he's the managing member at India Global Advisors. Really appreciate that. Colin Christie, thank you so much again for your expertise. If you could summarize as well.
Sure. Well, I echo what Campbell said. Yeah, please think of Southeast Asia. There's tremendous opportunities. And I think, think about it this way. What do you have that's of interest to 25 to 35-year-olds? Because there's a lot of them here. If one sector I mentioned that's rapidly growing is healthcare. So if you're a medical device manufacturer, if any kind of treatments other than COVID, but apart from COVID, healthcare is exploding here. And then if you're on the enterprise side, it's infrastructure, build. There's so many projects. And pretty easy place to do business because of the English language. A lot of bureaucracy, though, a lot of paperwork, but it can be navigated. So thanks very much for inviting me.
Oh, thank you. And you've obviously been very successful with that. So thank you. And then finally, Kirsty Wilkinson. She's the founder and principal at Asia Market Makers. She's the head of our chapter in Melbourne. Kirsty, thank you so much for pulling this together. If you could say a few words and wrap up.
Sure. Thank you very much, Doug. I have had a long-term, relationship with Southeast Asia, having lived there when I was quite young, and also having lived in Japan when I was an exchange student at high school. I'm really passionate about Japan and what opportunities it can provide. I think one of the main things, the biggest hurdle is mindset, and believing that you can succeed in Japan. Mindset is one of the biggest things that you've first got to overcome, and that's one thing I can really help with, and I'm really passionate about helping people do that. I think in Japan in particular, premium products and high quality products are something that Japanese love, and one of the things that was raised actually in the Japan to me after the Japan Megatrends and market update a little while ago was sit to stand desks, because apparently it takes about 2 or 3 months to get an order placed through IKEA in Japan, which is actually quite a long time lag if you're actually wanting to be able to work from home. And with a lot of Japanese companies getting the employees to work from home, I think things like that are a really good opportunity as well. I'd just like to say that I hope you've enjoyed today, and if you're in Melbourne and are interested in joining, we'd love to hear from you. Also, if there's anyone who's interested in joining the Global Advisory Board, we'd love to hear from you too. What we're trying to do is get a cross-section of people on the board so that we can come up with a whole range of different ideas. So watch this space, and Doug, thanks very much for the opportunity to be able to run this webinar today.
My pleasure. Thanks again to all the speakers. You finished up with a little bit on Japan, and I want to mention that next week, 3 or 4 hours before this, so 6 a.m. in Melbourne, I'm speaking with the Consul General for Japan, located in Los Angeles, and we're talking about Japan's response to COVID, and he's going to be talking about trade. So Kirsty, if you or anybody in Melbourne wants to get up at 6 a.m. and listen to Consul General Akira Muto and myself speaking about some of his perspective on the opportunities in COVID, very, very welcome a week from now. So I very much apologize for the time. It was given to us by the Japanese government.
Yeah, I was thinking of that actually. So.
And the other thing, of course, is, absolutely, I second what Kirsty said. We're growing in Australia. We have chapters in Melbourne and growing in Sydney as well. And now, Kirsty, you've introduced us to somebody on the west side, and we've got some other folks over there in Perth, and we're looking to grow in Australia as we are around the world. So if you're watching this and you want to be interested or get involved with Global Chamber and you're not yet, if you're in Australia, come on in. If you're anywhere else, come on in. We're growing a network around the world to be basically everywhere to facilitate business anywhere. So please join us. Thank you for taking the time today. And again, thank you to all the speakers. Have a great rest of your day or night, wherever you are.
Thank you. Thanks, Doug.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Doug.
Bye-bye. Thank
Thanks
you.
all. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.